Good evening and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm your host, Kevin Castley. Tonight is debate night. Thanks for joining us. So we don't have a moderator this night. However, it should be pretty cordial. I'm anticipating. We got Classical Alley here from Twitter. We're going to be debating free trade versus protectionism and economics. And how it's going to work is that the challenger, Ali, is going to get 3 minutes to make an opening statement. Then I'm going to get 3 minutes to have my opening statement. We'll have about 75 minutes for a lot of debate time. And then we'll have 3-minute closing remarks afterwards. I'll go first on closing remarks, and Ali can conclude on closing remarks. And then that'll be that. And then I'll have a post-debate show afterwards to go over my performance specifically. So with that, let's get into it. Well, I guess first, before we start the formal debate, if you just kind of want to introduce yourself to the audience, that'd be pretty good.
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Ollie. Some of you might know me from Twitter. I'm part of the Hawk community, and I'm pretty glad to be here to discuss trade and matters like that. So I want to say thanks to Kevin for hosting this.
Oh yeah, no, anytime. And if you out there in the audience would be interested in debating me, whether you're an enemy, an ally, neutral, etc., friend, etc., but you got disagreement with me, shoot me a DM on Twitter and we will work out a time to do debate night. And I'm open to debating basically anybody at this point. So with that, let's get into it. Ollie's got 3 minutes for opening statements.
All right, so let's start that. Okay, so my position is that trade has been generally beneficial for the United States. So while I understand that, so what I believe is that we should trade mostly with good countries. I think that we should divest from China. I think that us investing in China was a mistake from the start, and we should have never gotten involved there. So that being said, what I think United States trade policy should be is to decouple from China and to invest more, and we should open up trade agreements with allied countries and neutral countries to try to get them in our side geopolitically. Because in the 21st century, soft power and economics matter a whole lot more than they used to. That's how China's winning right now, is that they're expanding their economic influence worldwide. And I think that we need to do the same thing if we're to beat them in the second Cold War. So that being said, this is my position on trade. We should decouple from China. We should expand trade to neutral countries and to allied countries to expand our sphere of influence. And as for tariffs, what we should do is we should place tariffs, of course, on the military-industrial complex, and we should place tariffs on emerging industries so American companies can have a chance to thrive and to not immediately get flooded with foreign competition. And another thing I would look to find tariffs on is, of course, essential goods like medicines and things of that sort. That's my position.
Okay, gotcha. So well under 3 minutes. Okay, wonderful. So we'll go with my opening statements here. I'm just going to start the timer. Okay, so my position on trade essentially is that I have some agreement with Ollie there on decoupling from China. I think that China, communist China specifically, needs to be contained and isolated in the same way that the Soviet Union was, and it should have happened immediately after the Soviet Union fell apart, but it continued because of corporate interests that were basically addicted to cheap Chinese manufacturing. And that was a problem, and that became a gross national security risk because you've seen now the People's Liberation Army Navy especially has been modernized and increased in its capacity due to the profits that were garnered from trading with the capitalist powers. And that was incredibly problematic. But we have some agreement in terms of the decoupling. Now, my position on trade as it relates to overall the whole world is that for the Western countries specifically, I'm talking the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, we all must aspire and strive to become self-sufficient in terms of our capacity to produce essential goods. So obviously that being medical equipment, that being essential electronic equipment, that being any components related to the military. For essentially all purposes, the military must be self-reliant within the Western powers. And additionally, on that note, we also, and this is my position where I think we're going to probably have some disagreement, is heavy industry. I'm talking auto manufacturing, steel manufacturing, all that other stuff, all that good stuff has to be done domestically. And that is essentially a national security issue, because as we come up to the Third World War, which I anticipate later in this century, we're going to need to have a wide manufacturing base so that when the time comes to switch over to a wartime economy, to mass produce tanks and crewed aircraft, because most of the Third World War will be fought with low tech equipment after the vast bulk of the first nuclear waves go off, we will need to have the capacity to do so. And it's a lot easier to turn a car factory, for example, into a plant that produces tanks than it is to turn a design office where they design cars but have them produced elsewhere, or design phones but have them produced elsewhere, into a war production capacity. And so we're almost up on my time here, but I will say this though, that free trade on non-essential stuff with allied powers as well as neutral countries that we could sway towards us is fine, albeit we need to have a nuanced approach to it. I will say, but with that, my time is basically up. So we can get into the main discussion. So Ollie, if you want to start with it, go ahead.
All right. So if I'm getting the gist of your argument, so your main points, the first point you made was a self-sufficiency point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second point you made was about military production in case of a Third World War, right?
Yeah.
So those were your two main points, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and that additionally to that there's an interest in having basically all sort of essential products as well being made domestically. I guess that goes in with the self-sufficiency point. But
all right, so on the point of self-sufficiency, I think that the United States is already pretty self-sufficient both in economic terms and in capacity. You know, so if we wanted to, we technically could cut off all trade and technically still survive. Not every country in the world could do that, but we could. That being said, of course, it won't be good economically, but I think in terms of capacity, America already is largely self-sufficient. So on that point of self-sufficient, like one last point I want to make on that before I go to the other topic is the economy is pretty holistic, obviously. Like one industry always affects other ones, you know, so it's not like one industry is kind of like its own planet. That being said, we need to really kind of be careful with what we do when it comes to trade and our industrial policy to make sure that it doesn't negatively affect other industries. And I want to go to the point where you made about the wartime production. So I get what you're talking about, that we need to be ready in case a really, really big war happens. But sorry, I kind of got a stutter. Yeah. But what my point is that I believe in some degree of protectionism, obviously. Like I'm not like one of those like libertarian absolute free traders.
Okay.
So that being said, I do think that under most circumstances, our industrial capacity should be able to take on a big project like that. But in case that it's not enough, during world wars, of course, allied countries kind of do a combined effort. Like take World War II, for example. The United States and the UK cooperated on building aircraft. You know, we would build the frames, they would build the engines, that sort of stuff. So I think that during a major world war, it wouldn't be just a unilateral American thing. I think that manufacturing would be an important factor all around the world, and allied countries would be cooperating in that sense.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with that, though, is that in a Third World War, the ability for theaters to become compromised and for movement to propagate from enemy forces is much faster than in, say, World War II, where you could actually cooperate on things like that and diversify your manufacturing base. Whereas in a Third World War, it's very likely that you would lose most of the UK in about the first few days or so of it. And so if you had, say, certain components that you were dependent on over there, that could be very problematic because now they're occupied by the Russians or whatever, and that could be an issue potentially. I understand the point about how allied countries can work together, though, and that's true. I think the other big issue with that is we need to be clear about who's a loyal ally and who is wavering. I think South Korea is one, for example, that if push came to shove, they would very easily capitulate to the communists, and so we couldn't rely on having anything essential be made there because they just don't have the political will or the means to resist becoming occupied. The UK is a bit different. They have a better chance at that. Japan's a bit different, but even with Japan, there's still the potential for them to turn against the United States at some point in the future. And so I think the big countries that are the most loyal allies, though, are the UK, Canada, United States, New Zealand, and Australia, and
Yeah.
those countries are the most reliable, as well as Israel adjacent to that. But Israel is in a really bad position.
It's a pretty tight spot.
Yeah.
And just geographically, not just like geopolitically, Israel wouldn't be a great place for a huge like manufacturing hub.
No, that's exactly it. Even though they do have a lot of tech infrastructure and whatnot, they're just too vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I think to kind of go back to the point, though, about how, comparing the world wars, I think World War I and World War II were very similar. I think most of World War III will be really similar to World War I, but that the first part of the Third World War is going to move very quickly. And so one of the reasons why I want to kind of diversify that risk and have much more heavy manufacturing in the United States and Canada and the UK is so that basically you'll have some factories that'll survive the first waves. Whereas right now, you're right about the US technically having the capacity to maybe be self-sufficient, but I would note that the factories are not as spread out as they used to be. They're more clustered. There are fewer of them. It would be very easy to actually take out America's manufacturing base in like 2 or 3 waves of nuclear weapons. Whereas if you had them spread out, where even small towns and stuff had factories and everything, it would be a lot better because the Russians have about 1,500 active nuclear weapons that they got immediately deployed. China's got a few hundred that they could get ready to go. So if you've got a vast array of mid-sized towns and whatnot that have local factories and plants and everything, they're not going to be able to nuke all those. Whereas right now, you could actually take out America's manufacturing capacity in like several hours, which I see as a great vulnerability. But
yeah,
so I would even pair of Japan in that respect on cars, for example, so that you'd encourage more cars to be made at home. But
yeah, and I agree with that. Like, I believe in having an infrastructure project and a manufacturing project that can diversify geographically. Like,
Okay.
I call myself a one nation neocon, because like I'm pretty moderate on economics.
Okay.
So you know what the one nation conservatives are, right? In the
Well,
UK?
okay, I was going to ask about that. Can you define specifically to the audience what you mean by one nation neocon? Because that sounds based. So
Yes. So in the UK, one nation conservatives tend to be more moderate on economics. They tend to be like more pro worker and pro middle class. Like I take that and I just combine that with a conservative foreign policy.
well, that sounds based. That sounds kind of similar to what I'm advocating for in a way, But I think we might have a disagreement just on the extent to which tariffs would be applied and whatnot. I guess I guess the problem for me is that if we were in an ideal world where the whole world was like, say, just the United States, I'd have a really different economic policy than what I do now, for example. But I guess my question to you would be, if the whole world was the United States and we didn't have to worry about enemy threats and all that kind of stuff and wars and everything, would you have a different economic policy? Because some libertarians out there, they have like, oh, taxation is theft no matter what, you know?
I
Like,
mean, yeah. Like if the entire world was basically America 2.0, that would be pretty great. You know, we wouldn't need to have any tariffs or like anything like
yes,
that.
yes.
It would
So like
be
that's the thing, right? Like for me, in that sense, my economics in a globalized American world are more liberal than they are in a world that's coming up on a third world war in 50 years, you know?
yeah, because like if we had like an American New World Order, we wouldn't need to have like any tariffs. We wouldn't need to have like we would have like a multilateral liberal New World Order, and it would be great.
Yeah. And I don't even necessarily mean like the whole world being one country per se, but
Oh
I
yeah,
mean the whole
obviously.
world
Just
being
like
the West, you know?
yeah, like the whole world embracing the values of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I'd have a different economic policy then,
Yeah.
because then there's no enemies. But
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'd have a different foreign policy too.
that's right.
I mean,
That's
if
right.
there are
There'd be
no
no more
enemies to
war.
fight, yeah, there'd be no more wars, no more conflict. It would be great.
Yeah. I mean, to the extent that there would be war, it would be small terrorist
Yeah.
rogues and stuff. There wouldn't be great power conflicts anymore.
Yeah, there would
Um,
still be like small, sectarian violence going on in third world
true.
regions, but yeah.
True. Like the biggest extent of that kind of violence, though, would be between maybe different militia groups, because governments
Mhm.
by that point would be pretty secure, pretty stable. But you'd still have conflict and stuff popping up in the Middle East and Africa and whatnot. But it'd be a different world. We wouldn't have rival superpowers. You know, in a sense, it would be more similar to what the world looked like in 1996 than what it looks like today. But I guess the question that I have for you then is, are you cynical like me, or do you think that there's going to be a third world war, like a great power third world war this century, or do you think that that could be way down the road?
I kind of think it's going to be, well, I think it depends. Because looking at China today, the we have to look at the long-term trend. So you know what the middle income trap is, right?
The middle income trap, if I recall, isn't that basically the issue where does that go back to the whole CGB gray thing, or am I missing something there?
Oh, I
I'm
don't know
not
what the
100%.
CGB grade is.
Okay, not 100% sure on that. So yeah, if you can just kind of explain the middle income trap.
So the middle income trap, let me just pull up the real definition here, because like they know it better than I do. I know like basically the summary. So let
Okay.
me just pull that up. All right, so the Wikipedia thing says that the middle income trap is an economic development situation in which a country that attains a certain income due to given advantages gets stuck at that level. So the thing is about China is that a lot of economists say that they're headed towards that because for decades they've been essentially using global manufacturing as their lifeblood. But the thing is, as technology increases and the need for a lot of that declines, China would get stuck in the middle income trap, where they're too rich to prostitute their own workforce, but they're not rich enough to be like a really advanced post-industrial economy. So did that explain it kind of?
Yeah. No, I
All right.
get that. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think though that
Yeah.
China I
So
think
it's
that
where
China
they're
isn't
stuck.
down to that though, because China keeps trying to turn Africa into China though.
You're right. You're right, and that's a big concern that we're gonna have to deal with going into the future. But the but China, so a lot of economists and like basically like the trend that China is going on now is that if they don't do anything, which they probably will, because like they're pretty, you know, meticulous, like evil geniuses in the CCP.
Yep.
But the trend that they're going on now, they're going to reach a point where their economy would essentially be stuck between that of an industrial and a post-industrial economy. And that obviously is really bad for a country to be stuck in that phase. So what I'm concerned about, because like going back to the point about Third World War, what I'm concerned about see if the CCP is ascendant now and they're this aggressive and totalitarian,
Hmm.
imagine what they're going to be if China is declining. That's what I'm
Yeah.
concerned about.
Well, they'll be like Russia at that point. They'll
Yeah.
be very belligerent. They'll be invading their neighbors. They'll be trying to make ground as soon as possible. And unlike the position of Russia, they'll still have a big economy to fall back on still. Like even a stagnating China is still probably going to be the second biggest economy in the world at that point, right? Like
Mhm.
that's the issue.
Yeah, because like
And
I genuinely believe that communist China is going to be the biggest threat that America's ever faced. Like
yeah,
worse
you
than
mean more
the
than the Soviet?
USSR.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more than the USSR. And if you could just kind of explain, I guess, why you feel even more so than the USSR, because of course the USSR had about 100 times as many nukes, for example, than China did. They had a way bigger navy in the 80s. They had a bigger standing army in the 80s, right? Like,
Yeah, so the biggest advantage that China has over the USSR is their economic position. So really the communist system kind of sucks at economics. I think we both would agree on that.
oh,
Now
for sure.
Chinese communism, like communism in quotations, is pretty different than Russian communism. See, what the Chinese do is that they take some of the worst aspects of capitalism and they add it into the mix. So they can promote growth and all that stuff, but still have state control. So that being said, why I think China is worse is because at the end of the day, Russia was more or less isolated by a lot of countries. But for the CCP, they're already here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I
They're
know what
they've
you're
they've
saying.
already infiltrated a lot of global institutions. For the case of the first Cold War, it was easy to identify Russian spies and Russian assets and blacklist them.
Hmm.
For the new Cold War, it's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah. No, the thing is, I think I would generally agree with that. I do see a lot of people who will pivot to China and say, "Oh, what about China?" They usually, some of the people that I've had do that to me do that because they don't want to do anything about Russia. For you and me, I think we both want to get tough on Russia too, though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I watched one of your previous streams where you said that you'd use essentially economic warfare on
Yes,
Russia to just
for
deal
sure.
with them first. Yeah,
Yeah, well, I want to deal with them first because I think they're more desperate and they're
that's true.
closer to their end game. And you always want to worry when you've got a big nuclear state that realizes that it's only got a limited lifespan left. What are they going to do in that time that they have?
That's true. Because
And
like Russia, you see, Russia knows that it's approaching its demographic winter pretty soon.
yeah, that's why
And
I think they're a bigger threat right now.
yeah, and the reason why they're so aggressive now is that they're trying to consolidate as much geopolitical power as they can before literally their demographics start to catch up to them. And they might
That's
not have the
right.
manpower.
Yeah, that's right. They realized that they need to make some gains in territory. They took Crimea, they took eastern Ukraine, they took northern Georgia. That got them a few extra million people. That's not enough. They look at Estonia. Estonia is 1% their population and 3% their GDP. And they're jealous and they're pissed.
And a
And they
lot
know.
of it is the geographical too, because the Baltic states they provide warm water ports, something that Russia
Mhm.
doesn't really have a lot of.
That's right. I mean, they do have some in the Black Sea, but they have to go through Turkey for
Yeah,
that.
they have to go through the Strait of Bosphorus.
That's right. That's right. And NATO controls that. So that's
Mhm.
that's incredibly problematic for them. They
They
also
they also have like a pretty OP fleet in the Black Sea, if I recall correctly. They have a really big battleship there.
yeah, they do. They have the Piotr Veliki that's
Yeah,
stationed
that one.
there. That one is the largest nuclear cruiser in the world, to my understanding. And that one's an old platform with new equipment on it. And I think that the Russian Navy definitely poses a threat. But I do think, though, that that they are they are not going to be as big a threat down the road.
That's
I
true.
think that they think that we're inevitably going to come into conflict with them, and there will be a victor. And I don't think that it will be them. And I think that I would prefer to wage economic warfare with them, to basically say to my companies in Canada or in the United States, like, look, you're going to drill oil, you're gonna harvest gas, you're gonna sell to the Europeans, and you're gonna do it even at a loss because we have to bankrupt Russia. And you might say, oh well, that's expensive. Yeah, so was the Marshall.
So was the Manhattan Project.
So is the Manhattan Project. I'm like, which is more expensive? I had literally had people say to me, they're like, yeah, but good luck trying to get the oil companies on board with that. It would cost a ton of money. I'm like,
They'd
you know what
agree with it
costs a lot more
probably.
money is when we have a nuclear war with the Russians. Because, like, let's be clear, that demographic decline is not just like some passive thing where they go quietly into the night or whatever. The state that exists there will die to basically prevent its inevitable decline. And I think that it's almost inevitable that they're going to invade Ukraine, and they're going to invade Poland, and they're going to invade the Baltic states. And when that happens, it'll test NATO. And I don't believe that NATO would actually seriously defend those countries. I think Article 5 is a bit of a meme because we have weak leaders. But I think that in the ensuing period after they've made their first invasion, there would be some calls to actually start fighting them, and it would reach a breaking point, like how Hitler was able to make early gains in World War II, but then he invaded Poland and it was the final straw. I think when they invade Germany, or when they go for Germany, that'll probably be the final straw, and that's what would start a nuclear war with them.
I mean,
But
I think if they go for like Poland, that would probably be the final straw. Because like Poland is still a pretty strong country. I think they'd actually like be able to hold out for some time.
Oh, for sure. Poland has a bigger militia than they have a standing military, which I think is kind of base, because even though they don't really have the political capital to fund a big military the way that some countries have done, the people take it upon themselves to just like straight up, like, why did they join the militia? They're not like libertarian bros that are like, oh, we're in the militia to like Nancy Pelosi, man. Like, no, it's because they know history. They know what happened the last time the Russians raffle stomped them. So
I mean, Polish history is just them being invaded time and time again. So it makes sense that they'll develop some kind of a militia culture.
oh yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing is, Estonia and the Baltics, they're slacking. Like they have good economic growth, but they're slacking because it's like, if all you do in civilization is just focus on building your granaries and stuff like that, guess what? Some guy who's just been building up warriors can come over and raffle stop you, right? It's like, that's a problem. Poland does both. Poland is definitely taken it upon themselves to learn the lessons from what happened in Ukraine. But I think that if Russia actually seriously took Ukraine, I don't think that there would be a nuclear war over that. I think we would do it. And I think Putin knows that, but I don't think he's going to do it yet because he's still consolidating his hold over eastern Ukraine, Crimea, and northern Caucasus region. But I mean, so far we've kind of been in agreement about a lot of this stuff, but I think one of the big things why I've had some disagreements with people over trade is that I get the sense, and maybe this is just a misinterpretation on my part, but I get the sense from some people that they take what their ideal economics would be and they apply it to the present time and advocate for that right now without the nuance of the context of us coming up on a massive global conflict. And whereas for me, ideally, I believe for the most part in economic liberalism, but I also understand that a wartime economy can't just say, oh, but we're going to put corporate interests before state interests and all that kind of stuff. I think that we're not out of the woods yet as far as the dark period of history is. Like, people look back on World War II and think, oh man, that was horrible. Glad I wasn't born then. But it's like, yeah, but we're going to have a massive war later this century that people are going to look back on us and say, glad I wasn't born before that thing happened. That's my view. That's my view, at least. And I think we're still going to be at a point that calls for drastic measures that some people might call socialist or whatever. I don't really care on that one, but
Yeah, like, I don't think that what you're advocating for is socialism. I just think you're like advocating for Keynesian economics.
to some extent, like I don't even agree with Keynes on a lot of stuff. I think that that what he called the general theory of economics, it ironically is actually only a really specific case that only applies in a period of great downturn when those remedies would actually make sense. But we're going to have a third world war, and the only way that, ironically, the only way that we could actually avoid a third world war, and I've laid out on this channel for over a year now how we could avoid a big third world war, is bankrupt China, bankrupt Russia, and then after they go down, don't be like, they're done, we don't have to deal with them anymore. Go in and swoop and go for the kill and actually like balkanize them. That's what I would do to avoid a major third world war between nuclear superpowers. That's just my approach.
Yeah,
If
I
we don't
would
do
agree
that,
with that.
yeah,
I
but
do.
here's the problem. If we don't do that though, and we get serious and say, look, to all these companies that have bases of manufacturing in China and stuff, like, we get it. You have a legal duty to your shareholders to maximize profit. But if we're really going to have a social contract rather, where corporations are people owe their allegiance to their nation first, and then their profit second. And if they're going to go and commit treason and trade with communists to undermine our system, that's a problem. And we need to step in there and say, no, you're just simply not allowed to do business with them. That's the only way we can cut these guys off. Because what you described earlier about why you felt that China was a bigger threat than the USSR, would you agree with my assessment that we're the ones that allowed them to become like that in the West?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah, I think the fault lies with Bill Clinton, and yeah, I think the fault really lies with him. Like
yeah,
Bill
with Bill
Clinton did a
Clinton,
lot of good things, but that was one like that was a really, 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 really bad thing that he did.
I agree. Bill
The
Clinton,
thing is,
though,
like,
but
there was this false notion that trade would somehow liberalize China. Now, I think though I think that the reason why they got it wrong is because they thought that China was an unambitious country. Like they kind of treated China like they would treat like a smaller second world country.
mhm.
And I think that was where the mistake goes. Because like trade can liberalize small second world countries. Trade can bring those countries into your sphere of influence. But I think they miscalculated China, because China is a big country. It has a massive population. It has a pretty imperialistic history. I think that they just didn't take all of that into consideration.
No, I think you're right about that. I think we should have learned the lesson a lot sooner. And I think that the reason why it wasn't applied or put into practice was that by the time that it became apparent that economic liberalization wouldn't basically beget political liberalization, we were already too addicted to cheap crap that we couldn't really go past that and actually reverse course. And that how do you say to these massive multinational companies, look, you have to transition over to India or somewhere? They'd have every interest in not doing it, and we didn't have the political willpower to tell them no. And so we got stuck in this 30-year cycle of enriching them, helping them build up a big navy, helping them modernize their nuclear arsenal, etc. Well, we basically sold out our manufacturing base and whatnot. And I think that that's a big problem. But what I think about, when you mentioned Clinton did a lot of good work to actually counter Yeltsin's Russia. But you're right. I don't really think that he felt of China as the new threat after the formal Cold War was over. And I
Yeah, and like
think,
onto his credit, like I don't think it came out of a place of malice. I think he just genuinely miscalculated.
yeah, that can happen. That can definitely happen in history. People make mistakes all the time, for sure. But I guess to kind of get back to the point of the debate, though, because we mostly had a lot of agreement tonight, I think one sort of area where we might have some disagreement then is that do you think that that the best way to say cut off, decouple from China would be to straight up have the state do it? Or would you incentivize or subsidize companies or coax them to move elsewhere? Because if I was in charge, I would just simply lay down the law and say, like, you guys are done. Like, you either stop doing business with them or we just end you as a company. That's what I would say.
I would do a combination of both. So what I would do is for the really big stuff, like for the essential industries, like medicines, for technology, I'd have the state intervene there. I'd say you're gonna have to move out. And I would do a process where the state would eventually intervene for everything to move it out. But it'll have to be a pretty complex and holistic process too. I do a combination of both incentives and a state uh, intervention.
I see. I
And
see.
like a lot of it would have to be like us making trade agreements with these other countries, with India and Indonesia.
Yeah, well, I think that should happen, by the way. I think India in particular should basically become the new China. And I know I debated Ray Marasame about that, and she argued, well, what happens if they turn against you like China did and all that stuff? And I'm like, well, we can deal with that when it comes to it, but I don't think it would happen with India. But I
Yeah,
think I think India, the Indian system is way closer to us
that's
ideologically
true.
than China ever was. But I mean,
I mean,
even
yeah, I think what a lot of people don't take into consideration is Chinese history and Chinese culture. Like they've been pretty like China for a long time had a warrior culture. Then they still do. You know, they've had a warrior culture. They've had a pretty empire-based culture, and that resonates with a lot of people. So
Mhm.
you're aware of the century of humiliation, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what they basically termed the period after Britain subjugated them and whatnot, right? And
Yeah, and they can and like they hate that.
mhm.
The Chinese people hate that that happened to their country, and they still feel a lot of that resentment today.
No, I get it. I get it, and of course the communists use that to appeal to regular folks that weren't
Yeah.
ideologically Marxist. I mean, the KMT would have done the same had they won, but obviously they would have been closer to us, and they would have been against the Soviets instead of against the U.S. now, or against the Russians instead of against the U.S. now. But I think. I think one of the main issues that I have though with the combination approach, because like I get the logic of it that you say it's like carrots and sticks and that's how we're going to do it. I think the problem for me is that I see us as really running out of time, because even though an inevitable conflict that's actually kinetic with China probably won't happen until the second half of this century, it's going to be too late to have the economic remedy within the next decade. Like we're going to get to a point where they're just too powerful that even if we cut them off, we're still going to really seriously have a menace on our hands. Whereas right now, if we cut them off right now, I feel that they would basically go bankrupt within a couple of years of not being able to have access to global markets, you know? But
Yeah,
they're,
so part of the reason why I kind of want to do a mixed approach is that what I'm like my biggest concern is that if we were to just cut them off like tomorrow, what
mhm.
I'm scared by is that what if we go bankrupt? You know, because like they're gonna go bankrupt, but like we might probably go bankrupt too.
Well, what I would say to that is I would say all debt that's owed to basically what I consider rogue states would be rendered null and void. I would just say that immediately. I think to that point, though, it is a problem. I think it's a big problem. It's one of the reasons why on this channel I talk a lot about how all debt is a security threat, basically, especially public debt, because imagine America had no debt. Imagine America had say a 6 months, so $10 trillion sovereign wealth fund instead of $20 trillion national debt. You could do that a lot easier then. You wouldn't have to worry about going bankrupt, right? Now, we can't just make that happen overnight. That's going to take decades to build up. But
Yeah,
I think one
like
of the
that's
lessons,
I
yeah.
think that's like the main gist of my argument is that these things take time. Like it's a complex process that takes multiple steps. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but that just seems to be how things work.
How long do you think your plan would take to fully decouple from China? Because I feel like, if I came in there, I could get it done within one administration, but you're right that it would definitely cause an economic downturn. Obviously, I would just see that as better than a nuclear war. But
I think that with the right kind of structure, I think that it could be done within a decade. That's what I'm hoping for.
okay. I guess another issue too is that China would realize what was going on pretty
Yeah,
quickly, and they
yeah.
move to seek out, alternate trading sources, and so you'd have to across the board have
Mhm.
have basically proxy wars in Africa and Asia because
Yeah,
they,
we'd have to be like pragmatic with that sort of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I think no
Yeah,
matter
like
what though,
during
they're,
the Cold War, like
yeah,
we would fund like anti-Russian political parties and
yes,
anti-Russian groups. I think we're gonna have to start doing that again, but for China.
yes, but for
Because in
China,
Africa, they have like in a lot of these African countries, they're popping up like explicitly anti-China political parties.
no, I know. I know, and that's the thing. I think the best thing that the West can do in the third world right now is to basically fund anti-China movements. Because I mean, the problem is they're funding anti-Western
It's
movements in
true.
our own borders. They have these Confucian study clubs in Australia, and they basically own the realty market in much of Canada right now, and they control much of Hollywood at this point. Like,
They even have like ethnic enclaves in Southeast Asia where they control the local economy and use the native people there as almost like a serf class. It's like
absolutely.
feudalism, where they have like an elite class of Han Chinese, and everyone else is basically like a second class citizen. And
No,
like
no,
they're
no. You're absolutely right.
unfortunately not uncommon. Like you're seeing these all over Southeast Asia.
Yeah. No, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
I mean,
I
have you
think
seen
it's
the movie Crazy Rich Asians?
no, I haven't.
All right. Well, the main characters are is this like super rich Chinese family. And like I don't think that the studio really knew what they were making when they went into it, but the family essentially lives in one of these enclaves.
Hmm.
I mean, you should really look into it because like they're like really, really rich. I mean, it's in the title, Crazy Rich, you know?
No, I know. Like, here's the problem in BC where I live. We got a huge problem with investors that are basically they're trying to take their money and diversify it from communist China. So they pump up realty prices in BC where it's gotten crazy out of hand here, and it's totally undermined local Canadians and everything, and it's undermined our ability to even afford basic housing in BC as well as in Toronto to a lesser extent too. It's a massive problem. I actually though support taking in asylum seekers from Hong Kong, but I
Yeah, I
think
do too.
I think allowing money laundering to go on from the Communist Party is a huge issue in Canada, and it's a huge issue in Australia too. And our governments do not have the will, especially in Canada. We don't have the will to actually fight it. I mean, Justin Trudeau was going to train Chinese troops
Yeah,
at
I did see that.
that
He
was
was gonna do
embarrassing.
like winter training with those
That's
guys.
right. He was going to teach them winter combat from NATO tactics,
Like
and
just hypothetically, like I'm kind of curious, like why can't the Chinese just train in like Tibet or something to do like their winter training? I mean,
oh,
it's
for
cold
sure.
there.
But it was going to be, I get it, but like it was going to be like a show of solidarity, like Sino-Canadian friendship, all that stuff, because Trudeau's somebody who has said before that he admires their economic management, that he admires the
It's kind
direction
of
of parties.
ironic too, because like China, they take like the worst aspects of capitalism, and like Trudeau is like a lefty, so that doesn't really make any sense.
Right, but he sees them as like basically an anti-imperialist sort of
Oh,
endeavor.
that just
In that sense, like he likes
that's
Cuba,
cringe.
for example. I know it's freaking cringe. He's an embarrassment to our country, honestly, and it's a joke. And it sucks that the conservative opposition here is still cozy with the Muslim Brotherhood and everything else. Like we don't have a really independent political party here that isn't totally corrupt at this point. But it's why I'm still an independent. I mean, you think, why don't you join the Conservative Party? It's like, I don't like Aaron O'Toole. I don't know,
Yeah,
male.
I wish you guys had like term limits for your
I
PMs.
know. I know the U.S. has such a better system
I
when it comes
know.
to politics.
Like, no
Like,
matter what, we always have 2 terms. That's it. Doesn't matter who you are.
that's right. That's right. And that's the problem, is that our natural governing party is a center left to far left party, where the current prime minister has said on numerous occasions, expressed his sympathy for communist China. I mean, he's spoken about Xi Jinping almost the same way that Donald Trump spoke about Kim Jong-un. It's totally embarrassing. And so they're not going to do anything to counter big communist money coming into Vancouver, Toronto. It's never going to happen. So that's a big issue. That's definitely a big issue for sure, is that we didn't have to deal with that problem with the Soviet Union. Like, the Soviet Union didn't have a big share of British realty, didn't have a big share of Canadian realty. And money talks, unfortunately. And it's a lot harder to get people to realize that we're in a Cold War when they're getting their checks signed basically from Beijing. But in that sense, that's why I'm a bit more old school about this, where I just wish that we would have a strong leader come down and just say, no, we're done. Like, you can't do business with these guys anymore. You know, that's like, I wish we had somebody like, what's an example? Somebody like a Ronald Reagan type figure or a Harry Truman type figure who's just going to say, no, you're getting contained. We're not going to do business with you. We
I mean,
don't.
yeah, sometimes all it takes is one guy to change the Overton window.
Exactly. I mean, now it takes a lot more to change the political culture at large, but
To change the conversation, at least, it's one guy.
yeah, it can be one person. And I mean, think about how different the world would be, for example, if John McCain had won instead of Barack Obama. Syria, that civil war never would have happened. Like,
That's
it
true.
would have been over by 2012. They'd be a democracy today. Iran would be a Western ally right now, and we wouldn't have a nuclear threat there.
And Iraq wouldn't be a failed state.
That's right. We'd still be.
We would never have pulled out.
Yeah, we'd be in the later portion of the nation building project there, and Iranian influence wouldn't be a problem because they would have been bombed, the Ayatollahs kicked out, and Iran would be an ally like they used to be, you know?
And like, Russia wouldn't have invaded Ukraine.
They wouldn't have invaded Ukraine. They also for sure wouldn't have taken Crimea, because they would have known that John McCain meant business. So one person, John McCain versus Obama, just that one election,
And like, I don't know if you know this, but during Obama's presidency, the Chinese actually took a number of islands in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
And that emboldened them to do what they're currently doing there, where they're building artificial naval bases on artificial islands and essentially setting up military bases there.
That's right. And they're getting an expanded economic zone and all this kind of crap. I wouldn't even recognize those islands as having any legitimacy. I don't even consider the Communist Party as being the legitimate government of mainland China anyway. But I think that when it comes down to a lot of this stuff, though, one leader can make a huge difference. And that's part of the thing, is that I liked a lot of Trump's early rhetoric on communist China. I just wish he was a strong leader to back it up. Instead, he didn't really do very much at all. I mean, he did the trade war, and he did, in fairness to him, he did actually boost some U.S. steel production. But in my view, it was nowhere near enough. And his falling in love with the leader of North Korea totally undermined and betrayed any actual solidarity against the communists that he had. It turned out that it was just a cheap political talking point, because he also said later on that he loved the cake that he had with Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
So, like, just embarrassing crap like that. Like, imagine if you had somebody with Trump's rhetoric who actually believed in democracy instead of authoritarianism. What could happen, you know? Like, but I think for the most part, we've had a lot of agreement tonight. I want to take a look at the chat. Chat's been pretty quiet. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why the chat's been kind of quiet tonight is that it's two hawks having a debate. Like, if I'm debating a Nazbol, or if I'm debating something like that, the chat gets full with hawks and Nazbols arguing. But
yeah, because like, the thing is, like, we fundamentally agree. I think that the main difference is like the extent.
Yeah, I just think that it's so drastic that we don't really necessarily have the time to to take a decade. But what I understand, by the way, I will say this: I understand that like this isn't going to happen. Like, but I at least want to be on the record saying like, look, for future reference, don't let these guys get away with this stuff. Basically, you know. I want to take a look at the chat though. Cronus is here. He says,
let's see, why shouldn't we work with Russia to combat China? The two countries hate each other, and we have more in common with Russia culturally.
so I'll let you answer that first.
Well, you see, I want to talk about the culture part first. So Russia's not really part of Western civilization. It's like a weird offshoot, but it's not.
Yes, true. Here comes some pills right now.
Like a lot of people don't really know this, but Russia politically is actually the successor to the Mongolian Empire. It's not really a successor to any European or an enlightened state.
No, absolutely. They had all the khanates they were divided into, and all of the local princes and whatnot for a long time had to pay tribute to the Mongols. And after the Mongols were finally expelled, they based their princely dominions on, in essence, some of what the khanates had done. And
like a lot of people don't know this part too. But before Peter the Great wanted to like Europeanize Russia, Russia was aesthetically Russia was it was Mongolian.
Basically, it was Mongolian in spirit,
in style, yeah.
Yeah, they wore
Mongolian clothes, all that stuff, kind of stuff.
They were though they were hereditarily drawn though from the Kievan Rus, but the
Kievan Rus, like they eventually became Ukraine. Ukraine is the technically the successor state to them.
Yeah, but they broke off into a number of different like grand duchies and whatnot and everything. And you had like Novgorod, and you had Moscow. Moscow wasn't even like a significant city for hundreds of years after what we would think of as Russia, in essence, kind of came about. But that autocratic system, it was more or less divided up into a bunch of different kind of what you would say is like almost fiefdoms-ish, except they all claimed like princely titles and stuff. But they were they based their political system off of the Mongolian system that had hegemony over them for so long. You're right that Peter was the first one who really broke away with that and tried to copy
Europeify Russia.
Yeah, and actually I would consider Peter the Great to probably be he was probably, in my opinion, probably the second greatest leader that Russia had after, I think, Catherine the Great, in terms of just the extent to what he did for the empire. I know a lot of people would list, like if you look at lists, who was the best Russian leader, they'll say stuff like, the Levada Institute will do this all the time. They always list Putin as number one, of course, and then they'll say Stalin, and then they'll usually say like Tsar Nicholas II or Peter the Great. I think Peter the Great did more for Russia than Stalin and what's his name, then Putin, right? Like Peter the Great actually did a lot to improve Russia and make them competitive, but it was nowhere near close. So what Europe had. But
now on to the other part of the question, like why shouldn't we work with Russia to combat China? I mean, mainly because Russia hates us. Like, that's it. They really hate us. Like Putin, he's still sore from the Cold War.
Yeah,
he wants to see American influence decline.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't work with people that hate you. Like that's the problem, is that we don't have anything in common with them. What do we have in common with them? They're a KGB mafia state, basically, where 3,000 families have taken literally all of the fruits of the Russian people's labor for 30 years. Think about it. In 1989, average Russian made approximately $10,000 in United States money per year. Today, we're talking 32 years down the road. The average Russian makes a little under $10,000. It's like $9,800 or whatever per year. in US dollars, 2019 adjusted. So they're actually about 2% poorer now in real terms than they were 32 years ago. So all the gains that Russia's had, and their economy's grown considerably, all of that went to about 3,000 families that we kind of colloquially know as the oligarchs. But they're not all what you would think of as oligarchs, but it is the Russian establishment. And most of that went to the upper echelon, which is about 50 people. And of course, Putin's at the top of that.
Yeah, so they say that Putin is effectively the richest person in the world.
Oh, it's not even tough.
Probably
Like,
is, yeah.
Jeff Bezos, and you think about Bill Gates, we're talking about like $100 billion net worth. You're looking at Putin, we're talking
He's
like
probably a trillionaire. Like, let's
more
be
than
real, he
$1
probably
billion.
is.
He's taken a vast sum of the Russian GDP since he took over and put it into Swiss bank accounts and other assets. I mean, he makes $200,000 a year officially. His yacht is literally worth like billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So there's no way. There's no way. The dude is corrupt as hell. He's just grafted everything. I mean, Alexei Navalny, who ran a campaign against him that was focused on anti-corruption. Navalny, despite a lot of the praise and everything in the West, like, don't get me wrong, I agree with Navalny on Russian corruption. But like, let's be real. Navalny is also a Russian nationalist. He argues that Russia would be fight stronger if they got rid of the corruption. Like, let's be real. If Navalny became leader tomorrow, Russia would still be an enemy. They'd just be a more effective enemy because they wouldn't have bribes everywhere. That's his criticism of the Putin system. The Putin system's a joke. Like, Ukraine is an immensely corrupt system. Where'd they learn it from? They learned it from the Russians. Like, we have nothing in common with them. When you go to get your driver's license updated here, you go, they take a picture, you pay like whatever the fee is, and then that's good, and you go about your day, and it's good for another 5 years. In Russia, you have to pass along bribes. They'll expedite the process if you're big and rich and all this kind of stuff. Like their system as well, they can just disappear people in the night. Journalists there die of heart attacks as they,
or like suicides in quotations,
story buildings from their balconies, but it turned out that they had a knife. Like, what? I mean, no. And the reason why their excuses, the reason why their official causes of death over there are so ridiculous isn't that Putin thinks that the Russian people are stupid. I'll tell you, the reason why he makes the cause of death, the official cause of death, so goofy, so unbelievable, is that it's a power game, because he knows that he can blatantly lie to the Russian people. The Russian people know that they're being lied to, but they can't do anything about it, and he knows that they can't do anything about it. It's a way for a KGB thug to play mind games with the people and keep them in submission, and it works. And the message is sent. It's not, they don't give a plausible cause of death to be like, oh, the state didn't kill them. They give a ridiculous cause of death so that people know, oh yeah, the state killed him. That's the point. That's the point. We have nothing in common with these fuckers. Like,
that's
why
true.
would we work with them? Why would we work with the Russians? The Russians have 8,000 nukes. They have at least 1,500 on the ready right now aimed at us. They practice nuking our cities all the time. How the hell could we get along with these people? Like, the only way that we get along with them is after we seriously tear that country apart, divide and conquer, and set up pro-Western states in its stead. You know, I don't think that Russia as a vast united federation can exist. I think that we need to arm Chechen rebels. I think that we need to balkanize the place. And I think that it's only after that that we can exert leverage over each of those actors to pressure them to independently become more Western. Russia is just a massive political threat. There's no working with them. And it's not even like China. I mean, China, don't get me wrong, China was horrible. But we could work with them against the Soviet Union. We can't work with Russia against communist China. They're buddies with them. Like, you know. That's my little rant there.
Yeah.
And as far as the cultural level goes, yeah, Ollie's totally right to point out that the actual history going back to the 1200s, 1300s, and whatnot there. But it's also worth noting that the system that came out of Russia post Peter the Great still was an understanding of monarchy that was inherently autocratic. They didn't even understand the idea that people that there were lower ranks that had independent authority in the United Kingdom and whatnot, because to them the Tsar was absolute in his or her rule. There wasn't there was no Magna Carta. There was no anything like that in Russia. Russia's been basically a tyrannical system since its inception in the late 10th century. Like, they've never had a democracy as we would know it. Corona says, Kevin, would you support the Tarkin doctrine and use the Death Star on national security threats if you were an Imperial citizen in Star Wars? Wait, are you talking like this world right now, or are you talking?
No, I think he's talking about the Star Wars galaxy.
Star Wars world. Yeah, I think Tarkin's like one of my favorite characters in the Star Wars universe. I think he's based in Hawkbuilt, so he's an offensive realist dude. What do you think of him?
Well, I prefer more of the Thrawn doctrine.
Oh man.
I understand why Tarkin believed what he did. I just think that for the Star Wars galaxy, his doctrine is kind of like not pragmatic. Like, he led to the rebellion being formed.
Yeah, but then the Star Wars universe also realistically it exists to have cinematic effect.
That is true.
Rebellion has a real chance in real life. Like, if this was real life, let's be real.
The Empire would have won.
The hell out of any rebels, and that would have been it. But that would make for a good story. Like, it wouldn't be a good movie if the Empire just comes in, nukes everybody, and then that's that. But let's see. Sanctioning China isn't protectionism. We're not really necessarily talking about sanctions alone here. We're talking about broader economic strategy. Corona says, should we take advantage of ethnic tensions in China to help balkanize the country? Like giving arms to the Uyghur extremists so they destabilize Xinjiang? Absolutely. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, since they're already doing a genocide against the Uyghurs, why not just help them fight back?
Exactly. It'd be like giving guns to the Hungarians or the Czechs back in the day. It'd be base. Or giving guns to the Afghans to resist the communists. Hungary Country Ball says, well, maybe the Byzantine Empire because okay.
Well, that's just like a lineage thing. Yeah.
Corona said, I admire Ollie's extensive knowledge on this topic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, did you take like Slavic studies classes? Because I took a few Slavic studies classes back in the day. And
I just like to read about like Russian history.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Hey, Kevin. Did you hear how some Russian nationalists think that Russia is the legal successor to the Roman Empire?
Oh well, yeah.
Yeah, that's because the Byzantine queen married Ivan the Terrible. So they think that, but it's not really a good legal argument.
Well, no, it's not just that. I mean, Russian rhetoric going back a long time posited Moscow as the third Rome, that they were the last bastion of Christendom and all this. And the funny thing about that is that today, all these centuries down the road, you've got the basement Hot Pocket boys on 4chan, basically, obsessed with like hentai and stuff that parrot those talking points from back in the day. Talking about how we're degenerate, the most degenerate people in society. Talk about how Russia, a country where everybody's poor and they shoot up crocodile because they can't even afford meth and stuff. Oh yeah, but they're not like degenerate or anything, bro. They're the most nihilistic society in existence, but they're not degenerate.
Russia is like, I think it has some of the highest abortion rates, alcoholism rates, suicide rates.
40,000 Russian men die of alcohol poisoning and related traffic accidents due to DUIs.
I think AIDS rates too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely. Drug abuse, poverty, and here's the funny thing about it is, like, for all these people to say, well, they're a Christian country, only 3% of Russians go to church. 30% of Americans go to church each month or more frequently. So it's like all these people calling America degenerate. It's like, dude, America's 10 times more Christian. And of course, the irony is those alt-right guys are basically atheists.
They're like pagans anyway.
They're atheists, pagans, but they want a strong
esoteric fascists, basically.
Yeah, they want
They just want to be connected to something spiritual and esoteric.
That's right. So like they believe that like Thor exists and that he's like an Aryan master race and gonna like own Jews and stuff. And like, let's see. Nicholas says, both the Russians and the Chinese surely know that the U.S. is going after them after the events of the past few years. Yeah, well, I want them to be on notice. Corona says, one more thing. What are those books in your background, Kevin? I'd like to expand my reading list. I don't have time right now to go over all of them, but if I was going to recommend a couple books here, let's see. This one's good. The Master Plan by Brian Fishman. I think I talked about this a few months ago on this show. This one highlights basically the early days of what basically became ISIS and the guys who basically founded ISIS and how they went about their sort of strategy and everything. He highlights how they had connections to literally Assad and Saddam Hussein as well. So for those people who say, what do you call it? Oh, Saddam. Oh, well, Trump, for example, he said Saddam kills terrorists. Yeah, BS. Like he worked with terrorists, man. What else was there here? Oh, I know I talked about this one a lot. Anybody who wants to know what early North Korea was like, read The Great Leader and the Fighter Pilot by Ken Rowe. Blaine Harden on the story of Ken Rowe. Very, very good book. And we'll do one more. Yeah, we'll go Hiroaki Kuromiya, Stalin. This one's good too. Whenever I see people like Vosh, whenever I see these like anti-tanky types and stuff talk about how they need a revolution, but like let's not be tankies and stuff, bro, and we need to like instill theory in the youth and stuff like that. You read
this, be killed by the tankies. Like that's the weird thing. Like they'll eventually end up getting executed by the tankies if the revolution actually does happen.
That's my point. So in the book, Hiroaki Kuromiya talks extensively about Stalin's early days before he was ever the leader of the Soviet Union. And he talks about how the rest of the old Bolsheviks, the intellectuals, they didn't like him. They thought that he didn't fit in because while they were all in exile in Siberia, they were writing treatises and exchanging treatises with the comrades back in Leningrad or Petrograd at the time and Vienna. Whereas when Koba, as he was known, that was his nickname, Koba, when Koba would get into exile a few times to Siberia, what would he do? He'd go hunting and fishing and basically raping 14-year-old and 12-year-old girls. And he would not be writing treatises. He never read theory. He didn't really do theory or anything. To the extent that he had theory that came out, the socialism in one country, that was just copied from Trotsky. That was basically what Trotsky wanted to do. 5-year plans, focus on heavy industry, all that kind of stuff. Trotsky, of course, lost and had to leave the country, so he was butthurt about it and said, oh, the Soviet Union's the bad guys now, even though he was happy to kill 5 million people for Lenin. That's one of the few things that I'll give Stalin credit for, is that at least he killed Trotsky. But because Trotsky was the absolute butcher, the madman, the devil of the Civil War. Like I said, he killed like 5 million Russians for Lenin.
Hey, Kevin, what do you think of the notion that Trotsky would have actually been more dangerous than Stalin had he been made the leader?
Couple points on that. Well, Trotsky's original idea was basically to do what Stalin did. He just wasn't as savvy at playing politics. So in that sense, I don't think it ever could have happened. I think it was almost inevitable that Stalin was going to win the power struggle. But let's just say Stalin dies or something, so he doesn't have the chance to do it. Like, it would be of natural causes. I mean, he was smarter than the rest of these guys when it came to playing politics. Trotsky takes over. Trotsky would have done very similar to what Stalin did. In fact, I think that if Trotsky
would have lost World War II.
I don't think he would have.
The reason why I think is that I think he would have preemptively invaded Germany. I think he would have tried to.
I don't think he would have done that. That would have been insanity. I think he would have done what he wanted to do, which was build up Soviet industry so that the Soviet Union would be stronger. I think that Stalin and Trotsky would both look very similar in how they ruled, They both look very similar in how they ruled. But I think that to some extent, the Soviet Union under Trotsky would be weaker. I don't think that he had as necessarily the same, what would you say, that the same willingness to see through the 5-year plans as Stalin did. I also think that Trotsky was a bit too ideological, but that being said, I think that Stalin, by and large, was just, I mean, he was inevitably going to be the leader that took over, but
Right.
but I think that the problem with Trotsky is that Trotsky would have been too concerned with just the military side of it, and I don't think he would have done. I'm not sure on this one, but I'm not sure he would have done as much in the way of internal purging, and to some extent, I definitely think that he would have sent as many Russians to die against the Nazis as Stalin did, and everything. I'm not sure that the system would have been 100% as consolidated as it was under Stalin, and in that sense, it would have been weaker. I mean, in Hitler, in his final days, he remarked how he screwed up. He didn't purge the Nazi Party enough, and that he wished he had killed the bulk of the top brass the way that Stalin did, because shortly before World War II happened, Stalin had about 95% of the Red Army top brass executed, and he replaced them with young guys that would do whatever he said. Whereas with Hitler, he was constantly arguing with members of his top brass. And so he regarded Stalin as just, he was smarter. He just killed his generals before the war started. And he wished he had done the same, because he would have had loyal diehards that would have followed his directive to the end, basically, instead of constantly second guessing him. So in that sense, I think that Russia still would have won. Soviets still would have won, but I don't think they would have been quite as consolidated. So in that sense, I don't think it would have been as dangerous per se. I don't think they would have been as dangerous. I think Stalin was just, at the end of the day, Stalin was a more savvy leader than Trotsky.
Yeah.
But Trotsky was willing to. Trotsky was more of a true believer than Stalin, though. Trotsky would have sent more Russians to die probably against the Nazis than Stalin did. But Stalin was still somebody that had a broader strategy just beyond that. It's kind of tough. Like, you look at how Trotsky managed the war effort in the Civil War. Blatant disregard for anything. Just like raise everything, kill everybody. Stalin, despite not being this like educated, super theory focused kind of guy and whatnot, but again, he just basically stole Trotsky's theory and applied it. He did have more of a direction over the future of the Soviet Union. I think he was just a bigger threat altogether. I think he was a bigger threat altogether. Now, I think that Trotsky still would have won against Hitler, but I don't think he would have been as big of a competent force in the early Cold War that Stalin was. Stalin was just a resolute guy, and you read this book and you get to understand, what was going through Stalin's head, what was his sort of process. Yes, he was very ideologically devoted, even though he wasn't that well read on communism and communist theory, which he had a partner actually in that. Mao Zedong had basically read no communist literature. The Soviet comrades that went in there to provide assistance during the Civil War and everything, they were just amazed at how Mao couldn't really read anything, and how he didn't really know Marx or anything. He had this idea of Marx, and he wanted to apply it to the peasantry in China. That was about it. And Stalin, he had read some stuff. He wrote a few things, but that was about it. And all the old Bolsheviks were just, they thought of him as dirty. They thought of him as lowbrow. They thought of him as ideologically uncommitted. They thought of him as uneducated. And you know who won in the end? He had them all lined up and shot. So what does it matter that you were all educated? What does it matter that you devoted your life to your communist theory? What did it get you? It got you lying as a corpse in the basement of the Vladimir prison, soaked in blood. That's what it got you. It got you a grave. And so this is why I think it's important when it comes to all these tankies, and when it comes to the anti-tankies especially, is that for most of the tankies that are out there, they're weak, they're feeble, they're not the most brutal comrade. They would not win. Now, are there some tankies out there on the internet that could actually be the next Stalin? Absolutely. They're willing to kill anyone to get power. But there are a lot of techies out there that are just too squeamish for it. They're not cut out. They would get murdered. People like Vosh that want a revolution, for example. You can read all your theory and say, "Oh, but I'm independent history, man, and don't tie the Soviet Union to me and everything." Yeah, but you're still going to meet the wall, dude. Like that's what's going to happen. That's absolutely what's going to happen. The lesson from history and the lesson from all of this is that it's not the most educated comrade that prevails. It's the most brutal comrade that prevails. And you also have to be able to play politics savvily. I mean, if Stalin had made it clear very early on that he was just going to kill all these guys, Zinoviev and Kamenev would have sided with Trotsky, and they would have made Trotsky the leader. The reason why they actually sided, this is funny, I'm not sure, you probably know this, Ollie, but just in case the audience doesn't know this, the reason why Bukharin and Zinoviev and Kamenev actually backed Stalin when the vote happened and when it was going to be determined whether it was Trotsky or Stalin that was going to take over. The reason they backed Stalin instead of Trotsky was that they were terrified that Trotsky was going to have them lined up and shot because he was fucking crazy. So they sided with Stalin as a safer bet. And I think they probably made a good choice on that. No, I think they probably made a good choice on that because they at least had a few more years to live before Stalin had the show trials. I think with Trotsky, he probably would have had them lined up and shot pretty quickly on it. But that's one of the things I'm saying is, here's the thing. I hate Stalin, but the one thing that you can kind of say, gotta give him some credit, is that at least he killed Trotsky. So that's my view on that. So,
yeah. I think we should do the closing statement soon because I'm going to have to go soon.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. This wasn't even so much of a debate as a conversation. Thank you to the audience and everybody for being here. We're going to go to closing remarks. So, Ollie, you got, or I guess I'll go for 3 minutes first and then we'll let Ollie close it out because he started. So basically, my stance on this as it relates to free trade and protectionism is that we can move towards more liberal economics down the road after we clean up the great divide between the islands of slavery and the continents, or rather the islands of freedom and the continents of slavery, and we achieve a world that is totally and unquestionably dominated by American hegemony. We don't have that right now, and in lieu of that, we are going to be drawn into a great conflict with the forces of darkness in Eurasia, with fascist Russia and communist China. Now, we can either destroy them economically and get very tough and have a very, very firm and stern position when it comes to directing our economic engine not to interact with these people and to undermine them at every turn, or we can wait and we can have a nuclear war with them. Either way, I believe that the West will win, but the way that we can ensure victory in the Third World War is to diversify our manufacturing base, to encourage and spur heavy manufacturing at home, and to protect and ensure that our ability to produce essential medical and electronic and military goods is reserved on a domestic level. And I'm not saying total autarky. You can make cheap stuff. You can make bubble gum and stuff in India. That's cool. And we can help make them rich. We can work together. But we're not having medicine made abroad. We're not having tanks made abroad. And for that matter, I would argue that in any area where heavy industry is concerned, we need to go about making that a domestic priority, and we need to firmly and swiftly decouple from communist China. So thank you for watching. And so with that, we'll go to Ollie.
Yeah, I want to say thanks for hosting the discussion. It was pretty good. I thought it was pretty productive. So generally, I think that we should decouple from China. I think that that's the first step in fighting this new Cold War. I think that we should diversify our economy both at home and abroad to invest in allied countries and third parties to make them in our sphere of influence. I think that at the end of the day, we will win. I just want to make that victory as swift and as guaranteed as possible.
Absolutely. Well, I think we agreed for the most part, but I think you're right in your assessment that we disagree on the extent to which, and I guess the speed to which this should all be applied. But we have the same goals and we have the same convictions and the same long-term objectives. And so it's always good to to be joined and to talk with a base talk. So that's Ollie over here. So before we end this, where can the people find you?
On Twitter, my handle is classical_Ollie. You can find me there.
Based. Okay.
All right.
With that, I will say I'm just going to follow you right now. Actually, I'm not following you. I wasn't following you. So
Oh, thanks.
you are number 97 out of 99. So
Oh, cool.
there we go. I don't really follow people, but Ollie, I'll follow Ollie. Ollie seems based. So there we go. So with that, thank you for watching. If you're interested in debating me, shoot me a DM on Twitter. My DMs are open. We'll schedule a time. I'll literally debate Hawks. I'll debate Navs Bulls. Like, it doesn't matter what your views are. You got a disagreement with me, come on and debate me. And there we go. So that was Ollie. You can go follow him on Twitter. And with that, I stream every day. I do daily premieres and daily streams. So you make sure you're subscribed. But we're going to wrap this up right now. I'm going to do a short post-game analysis. And with that, thank you for watching. Have a good night.